Hi, my name is Lauren Huff. My passage is from Charles Dickens Bleak House, Chapter 3, A Progress. Esther Summerson is leaving her home and housekeeper, Mrs. Rachel, to go to Reading, where the famed Mr. Jarndyce has established a temporary lodging for her. This is the first time, unbeknownst to Esther, that she meets Mr. Jarndyce on the carriage ride. The scene is vital considering John Jarndyce's major role in the novel, this being his first appearance, and his potential relationship to Esther, that's confused between father and suitor when they meet again later. The scene introduces John's light-hearted and willing-to-please nature. From the very start, he's a caregiver to young Esther. Mrs. Rachel was too good to feel any emotion at parting, but I was not so good, and wept bitterly. I thought that I ought to have known her better after so many years, and ought to have made myself enough of a favourite with her to make her sorry then. When she gave me one cold parting kiss upon my forehead, like a thaw drop from the stone porch, it was a very frosty day. I felt so miserable and self-reproachful that I clung to her, told her that was my fault. I knew that she could say goodbye so easily. "No, Esther," she returned. "It is your misfortune." The coach was at the little lawn gate. We had not come out until we heard the wheels, and thus I left her with a sorrowful heart. She went in before my boxes were lifted to the coach roof and shut the door. As long as I could see the house, I looked at it from the window through my tears. My godmother had left Mrs. Rachel all the little property she possessed, and there was to be a sale. And the old hearth rug with roses on it, which always seemed to me the first thing in the world I had ever seen, was hanging outside in the frost and snow. A day or two before I had wrapped the dear old doll in her own shawl and quietly laid her, I'm half ashamed to tell it, in the garden earth under the tree that shaded my old window. I had no companion left but my bird, and him I carried with me in his cage. When the house was out of sight, I sat with my birdcage and straw at my feet, forward on the low seat to look out of the high window, watching the frosty trees that were like beautiful pieces of spar, and the fields all smooth and white with the last night's snow, and the sun so red but yielding so little heat, and ice, dark like metal, where the skaters and sliders had brushed the snow away. There was a gentleman in the coach who sat on the opposite seat and looked very large in quantity of wrappings, but he sat gazing at the other window and took no notice of me. I thought of my dead godmother, the night when I read to her, of her frowning so fixedly and sternly in her bed, the strange place I was going to, the people I should find there, and what they would be like, and what they would say to me, and a voice in the coach gave me a terrible start. "What the devil are you crying for?" I was so terrified that I lost my voice and could only answer in a whisper, "Me, sir?" For of course I knew it must have been the gentleman in the quality of wrappings, though he was still looking out of his window. "Yes, you," he said, turning round. "I didn't know I was crying, sir," I faltered. "But you are," said the gentleman. "Look here." He came quite opposite to me from the other corner of the coach, brushed one of his large furry cuffs across my eyes, but without hurting me, and showed me that it was wet. "There, now you know you are, don't you?" "Yes, sir." "And what are you crying for?" said the gentleman. "Don't you want to go there?" "Yes, sir." "Where?" "Why, wherever you are going," said the gentleman. "I'm very glad to go there, sir." "Well then, look glad." I thought he was very strange, or at least that what I could see of him was very strange. He was wrapped up to the chin, his face was almost hidden in a fur cap with broad fur straps to the side of his head fastened under his chin. But I was composed again, not afraid of him. So I told him that I thought I must have been crying because of my godmother's death and because of Mrs. Rachel's not being very sorry to part with me. "Confound Mrs. Rachel," said the gentleman. "Let her fly away in a high wind on a broomstick." I can't be really afraid of him now, and looked at him with the greatest astonishment. Thought he had pleasant eyes, although he kept on muttering to himself in an angry manner and calling Mrs. Rachel names. After a little while I opened his outer wrapper, which appeared to be large enough to wrap up the whole coach, and put his arm down to a deep pocket in the side. "Look here, in this paper, which was very nicely folded, there's a piece of the best plum cake that can be got for money, sugar on the outside an inch thick like fat on mutton chops. Here's a little pie, gem this is, both for size and quality, made in France. What do you suppose it's made of? Livers of fat geese. There's a pie. Let's see you eat 'em." "Thank you, sir," I replied. "Thank you very much, indeed, but I hope you won't be offended. They are too rich for me." "Floored again," said the gentleman, which I did not at all understand, and threw them both out the window. He did not speak to me any more until he got out of the coach a little way short of Reading, when he advised me to be a good girl and to be studious, and shook hands with me. I must say I was relieved by his departure, when we left him at a milestone. I often looked back at it afterwards, and never for a long time without thinking of him, and half expecting to meet him, but I never did, and so as time went on he passed out of my mind.